We know what the countdown means. We know what the music means. It is another live stream here on all of our social channels across Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Thank you guys all for joining us. If you've joined us in the past, or if you plan to join us in the future, you should know that these are AI Insights, our multi-part live stream series designed to help you assess and think about your iteration of AI in your business. We tend to think that we're the leaders in this space, and I am joined by a lot of those leaders in our space from the AI Labs team. This will be about choosing a large language model, right? We know that that's going to take a lot of assessment on what your model size is, the performance and suitability for some of those tasks that you hope to put inside of your plans in your organizations or business. And our Domo AI Labs team is here to help you do that efficiently and effectively. We are always excited to be joined by our good friends at Domo, Florencia, a regular now on the Domo live streams, Jeremy Rogers, Joe Clark, Brian Hong. Thank you guys so much for being a part of today's live stream. I can't wait to see what you have to offer today. As always, for all of our watchers or listeners, whatever you may be doing to consume this piece of content, make sure you're using the comments or the chat section, whatever social media channel you are on, and we will try our best to get to those during this session to answer those specific questions. But this is AI Insights Part 3. We're going to be talking about LLMs, considerations when choosing an LLM. There's a lot of acronyms there. And we're excited again to give you another AI live stream series. Florencia, AI Labs team extraordinaire, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to your team. Excited to get this session started.
Thank you. We should do these more often. I feel like every 2 weeks is not enough for me.
Wow. I agree. Yeah.
Let's just set it up every day.
I feel like Florencia is putting a lot of work on my plate. That's okay. I'm happy with it. I would love to.
You're good at it.
I'd love to see more of you and your team because you do such incredible stuff. All right, let's get things started. Joe Clark, I think, will be our first presenter today. Florencia and I are going to get out of the way this time, and we're going to let the team take it from here. So, Joe, thanks again. Appreciate you and Jeremy and Brian being with us, and excited to see what you have to offer.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Florencia. And before I go ahead and share my screen, I did just want to say, if you've been on the past couple of these and you're wondering why, hey, that Joe Clark looks a little different today, we do actually have two Joe Clarks working on AI projects here at Domo. So I apologize for any confusion. It's a little confusing for us sometimes too. Either way, I'm excited to be here and excited to show, the things that I'll be talking about specifically are going to be more about the features that we're building in Domo, and I wanted to start with that, and then also a little towards the end, talk about how once you learn a bit more about LLMs and how to choose the right LLM for your particular task, how you can actually use those LLMs inside of Domo to do actually quite a few things now. We have a lot of integrations in Domo that we're excited to share.
Awesome. We're excited to see them. And again, if you have questions or comments, throw them in the chat and we'll take care of those after. Brian and Jeremy, we'll catch you a little bit later. Watch this. I have the power to remove everyone. Joe, the solo Joe Clark, as I like to affectionately call them, Joe Clark squared on the AI Labs team. He who must not be named. All right, Joe, here we go.
All right, get this screen share going. So I did want to start talking about some of the things that we are working on here on the labs team at Domo. And we've talked about some of these things at Domopalooza. One of the things I'm most excited about personally is AI chat. And this is really exciting. One of the, I think, ways that the LLMs have really become a strength as far as the use cases is making our software easier to use and also making us more productive. AI chat hits both of those things. Actually was going to do a quick demo showing this data set that I have here. And this contains a bunch of NFL team statistics over year over year. And so we can ask relatively complex questions. I have, we have like passing and rushing, offense and defensive statistics. But if we ask a question like which team had the most pass-heavy offense compared to run in 2023, send that request in, it'll do its thing, it'll query the data set. We automatically pull in the current data set, or if we're looking at a dashboard, we'll pull on the data sets on that dashboard. And you can also, by clicking on this focus area, adjust which data sets you're looking at. And one of the other things that we do that we really like is we'll see, we can actually look at the SQL editor or the SQL query that it's using to generate the answer. And so this time it actually looked at pass yards. Sometimes it looks at pass attempts, and we're looking at ways to configure that. So from the perspective of which team had the most pass yards versus total yardage, the Minnesota Vikings in 2023 completed their offensive yardage was 73% from passing, and the remainder from running. So really cool to see that coming together and working. Something we're not showing here is that we're also working on actively right now before we have GA is the ability to save these charts. So you can ask a question, you may get multiple supporting charts back. You'll be able to save it. You'll be able to edit it and share it with others. The other kind of high-level AI application we're working on is page generation or app generation. You can build both the apps and dashboards. We do suggest some things you can look at. So let's just pick one of the suggestions, and it will start analyzing this data set. I mentioned before, we really like AI, generative AI, for improving productivity. And so, I think the end goal of this isn't, hey, we're going to generate a perfect dashboard that you're not going to have to touch. It's, hey, can we give you some really good ideas of things you might want to look at when you're looking at a data set? And if we can get you some cards that are 80-90% of the way there, that's a huge advantage from a productivity standpoint, compared to just looking at a blank screen and where you're not sure where you want to start. Let's see if I can. Yeah, now that it's printing those out, I can't scroll up to the top, but we do quite a bit of work here under the covers to find which columns are correlated with each other, and other insights that we send to the AI before we generate these cards. And then once I've generated a few cards, I can pick another data set or ask another question and get a few more cards. I can select or deselect the cards that I want on my dashboard. And then I can go ahead and hit let's create an App Studio app. And it will go ahead and save the charts. And then once I have the app, I can go in and take a look at those individual cards, and maybe adjust the card type. If I like the insight that it's trying to present, but I don't like the card type, maybe I can just go in and adjust the card type, or modify the sort, or add a filter. If I want to look at a specific year. And so I just wanted to share a couple of those high-level AI applications that we're building that we're really excited about before we jump into kind of the nitty-gritty, low-level details about LLMs to help you guys get excited as well. And with that, I will hand it over to Brian to get us started talking about those nitty-gritty details.
Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate that. We had a question come in that I thought maybe we probably address here at the top, right? Brian on LinkedIn asks, how do you train the LLM to understand the meaning of a specific organization's business data? Probably a little tricky, right?
Yeah, it definitely can be tricky. And right now we do take a look at the data set metadata. So if you put some of that information in the column names and descriptions. The model can understand that a little bit better. Obviously, there are better ways with a full-on semantic layer, and that's actually one of the things that we're working on before GA release of AI chat as well, is having a full semantic layer so that you can provide all of that context that the model might need to be able to understand your organization's business data, and to help it when your users are asking business specific questions in business specific language.
Right. Nolan had a great response to Brian there on LinkedIn, which, they don't currently train their models on any specific organizational data. We're using metadata about the data set to give the model context to the structure of the data, I think is probably a great start. We'll save some other questions here probably for the end, so we continue chatting and bringing on Brian, part of the Domo AI Labs team, an associate data scientist with them. Excited to chat with you, Brian. First time on the live stream, right?
Yep. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Joe.
No problem. I don't want to make you any nervouser than you already are. It's a big deal to be on these live streams. I'm kidding.
Oh yeah, very excited.
I'm joking. Nothing to be worried about. The community's great. Everybody here is extremely welcoming. So excited to see what you have to offer. Brian, why don't you dive into what are LLMs? I see we've got your presentation up, so take it away.
All right. Thank you everyone again for tuning in today. So we have a very wide range of audience here today. So we figured it would be a good idea to sort of have a walkthrough of what LLMs are at a high level and hopefully give a bit more context to all of these cool solutions that we're offering at Domo. So for starters, LLMs, the three-letter acronym stands for large language models. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down sort of part to part. And let's just start with the concept of a model, right? So at a very high level, a model is something that takes an input and maps it to an output by representing the relationship in some way. And a very simple example would be the classic linear regression, or we could think of it here as a line of best fit, just a line with a slope and an intercept. And here I've just represented it in the good old y equals mx plus b form. And in this specific case, it could be considered a model in that it takes in a value x. It understands that there's a relationship between x and y that could be represented by m, the slope, and that is also offset by the intercept b. So that is essentially a very simplified consideration of a model. And obviously, there's many far more complicated models and machine learning models out there. Your organizations might be using, say, a forecasting for customer demand. That would also be considered a model type. You might also be doing some sort of churn prediction or churn analysis. That could also be considered a model. Now, let's take it another step forward and loop in that language. So what is a language model? And once again, at a high level, it's a model that is able to, in some way, represent human language and produce outputs based on inputs. And in this case, the example I have for you is what we call an n-gram model. N could be 1, 2, 3, so forth. And what it does is it takes into consideration the words prior. So in this case, we would have the sky is as the prior words going into the model. And then given the prior words, a conditional probability of what words we would expect to come next. In this case, these are just made up numbers, so don't come after me on these percentages, but it's safe to assume that blue is a common word to come after saying the sky is. Cloudy might be also relatively common. Dark could also be another common word. And in this approach, we're going to choose the highest probability word as the next word and complete the rest of the sentence as the sky is blue. And examples of language models that we have seen for many years at this point would be, say, the autocomplete on your mobile device's keyboard. That is an approach that is considered a language model that predicts the next word that you're going to type from either a whole word or a couple letters in your sentence. And from here, let's take another step up to fully what are large language models. And as examples, I'm sure many of you have either seen on the news or have personally interacted with ChatGPT. That's OpenAI's fine-tuned solution based off of their GPT series of foundational models. And this GPT series, for example, 3.54, are examples of large language models. Anthropic also has a couple of products, right? Their Claude family of models are also large language models. Similarly, Google with Palm, the Pathways language model, is another example of language models. And most of these are what we would consider base models, foundational models, essentially models that have already been trained and are ready for use and application in various business problems and various solutions that require a large language model. Now, just for a little shallow touch into what these large language models are under the hood. Under the hood, they're based on transformers. It's a relatively new innovation within the past decade and is a deep learning architecture. And to sort of oversimplify, if you will, what it is it takes words in, converts those words into embeddings or numbers, and then does a lot of math with those numbers before converting them back into words. So under the hood, it's numbers, but what we put in and what we get out are often words. And this is specifically in the context of large language models for text generation. There's other text image solutions, image to text solutions. Those are a different approach that we could maybe touch on in future webinars. And with the examples that I've given above, the specific type, or what we specifically call them in terms of transformers, is these are generative pre-trained transformers. That's what GPT stands for. In most cases, you see the letters GPT. And to sort of break down this phrase as well, generative is telling you that it is creating text based on your inputs, right? Generative AI, same usage of generative here. Now, pre-trained is a key word here because it tells you that the model is already trained. It gets rid of what, in our opinion, is one of the most difficult challenges when it comes to large language models, given the term large. And we'll touch on that a bit more in the next bullet points. And finally, transformers, we've talked about that already. So coming back to the concept of pre-trained as well as the definition of large, when it comes to some of the leading and cutting edge large language models of today, the number of parameters we're talking about are in the hundreds of billions. And quite recently, we've broken into the trillions. Now, that's a lot of parameters. And in order to correctly adjust these parameters and create these weights, you need a lot of data. And when it comes to the sizes of these training data sets that are going into large language models, they are extraordinarily large, right? We're talking the scale of the internet. Some of the leading large language models are in the tens of billions of web pages, or in the tens of millions of Wikipedia articles, tens of millions of forum posts, forum threads. And that is the scale of data we're considering when it comes to training a large language model that could be used as a foundational model for application in various business challenges and various business solutions. And all of that is very resource intensive to develop. So intensive in, first of all, you're going to need that scale of data, and collecting that scale of data is not without challenges and, to a certain extent, not without controversy. And beyond that data, even if you had the data, when it comes to actually training from scratch a large language model, the amount of compute you'll need to use. So we're thinking computational power, let's say renting out GPUs to do the training, is probably going to be well into the 7 digits range in US dollars. So all of this goes to say that large language models are very large in terms of both their parameters, the amount of data you need to train, and also the resources that you're putting into it. And with that said, with most organizations, when it comes to starting out with large language models, right? When it comes to starting to build solutions with large language models, it's usually a good idea to start from an existing model, right? Take an existing model, build off of it, and see if it's able to address your challenges. And if it's not, then we could go from there. And even with existing models, there are middle ground approaches that avoid having to train your own, right? There's approaches such as few shot learning or fine tuning, as well as other approaches such as retrieval augmented generation, which I believe we've talked about in a prior webinar, which hopefully someone has a link to that somewhere. We'll be happy talking more about that as well if anyone has any questions. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy to talk about what is things to consider when it comes to actually choosing a large language model.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Really appreciate you being part of the live stream. For a first timer, what do we think, everybody? It was a great job. Let's give him some kudos in the chat. We'd love to see that on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, wherever you may be joining us. Didn't have any specific questions to your presentation, Brian, which is great. But if anything comes up between now and then, we'll bookmark them for the end of the session. Jeremy, how we doing?
I'm doing good. Just coming at you live from my basement.
Oh, see, you don't have to tell anybody. Your camera is blurred. It's not.
You know what though? You know what? We're painting my office, so and I think you can see it. So, you know.
Oh, I don't. You're the only one that knows what your office or your basement looks like. That's
well, you know, it was
earlier,
intimidating after seeing Joe's beautiful background. He has the mountains in the background, and you know, so you know, it's hard to follow up on. So don't judge too harshly. But hopefully, I'll make up for it with my content.
Yeah, as most people know, I'm in Indiana, so I was, you know, joking with Joe. I'd be more than happy to turn my camera around and you guys can see cornfields for, you know, the next 50 miles. But Joe has a pretty background. We all get it. Jeremy has given it away. He is in his basement, in an undisclosed basement. Maybe he's held hostage. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you're the only one that knows that, Jeremy.
It's quiet.
Also,
Not
Brian,
anymore. Not anymore.
Yeah. Brian, kudos to you, brother. Fantastic explanation. Very easy to follow. Hopefully not too hard to follow. Jeremy Rogers up next, a senior software engineer here at Domo. Jeremy.
All right, we'll give it a try. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as Brian had mentioned, I'm going to go through and talk about choosing the right LLM for your use case. And as time goes on, that becomes a more and more difficult thing to assess. And we have several different providers of large language models, and you know, as many people know, they just keep releasing better and better models, which is good news. But when you look at something even just as small as a few providers and just the text generation models, it quickly becomes very overwhelming. And so that's what I'm hopefully here to help with. Is I want to evaluate a few of the different factors that you should consider when you're going about picking an LLM. So I'm going to talk about the different task types that different LLMs set out to accomplish. And then we'll look at how to measure various LLMs, the output quality of one LLM versus another. And then we'll look at some different price considerations, speed consideration, context window length. And finally, we'll wrap up with one of the most important things to consider, which is privacy. So just in general, the generative AI tasks that we see out there, we see a lot of text-to-image models where you put in some input text and it generates an image for you. Text-to-audio, so it's turning text to some lifelike spoken audio, and it could be in different languages as well. And then audio to text, just the reverse, where we're transcribing audio into text. And then I think the use case that a lot of us are most familiar with is text generation models. Think OpenAI, ChatGPT, where we're inputting some sort of text and we're getting some really relevant response output text back. And then, similar to that, and I was on the live stream a couple of weeks ago, we talked about vector databases, and those use what are called embedding models pretty heavily. And the idea there is we input text, and what we get back is a list of numbers that have the inherent meaning of what that text is, just in numerical format. And that's really useful for the search use cases and the things we went over in that previous live stream. So if you have questions about that, I'd point you to that previous live stream. And then we have multimodal. That is, I know GPT 4.0 just came out, which is a multimodal model. And these models are models that accept a variety of input modalities. So you can now pass text and image and oftentimes audio. And all of that context together hopefully provides a better output. So that's the first consideration. What is the actual task that you're trying to achieve? The next thing I want to talk about is quality. So, how can we compare the textual output of one model versus another? And it turns out this is kind of a difficult problem. Certainly for me as a software engineer, I'm used to things being deterministic. I put in the same text or same parameter to a function call that I expect a deterministic answer, and that's typically not the same. The case here is, here we have the outputs. They can be semantically similar, but the words are different. And so that requires some sort of natural language processing to compare the textual similarity of the two outputs. And so lucky for us, researchers and industry, they've come up with a variety of these benchmark data sets where they do just that. They have a question or a list of questions and various expected outputs. And then we would run an LLM and compare the response that we get to the expected answer, and we'd give it some sort of accuracy score. And while this is incredibly useful, I don't think it's a replacement for curating your own data set, your own benchmark data set. So for whatever use case that you're going after, I would strongly advise, coming up with a list of questions that you're going to ask or your customers may be asking, and coming up with some human written expected answers, and then comparing the output quality of those answers versus what you expect. And we'll take a look at a little bit about how we do that at Domo. So anybody who's looked into these benchmarks, you've probably seen charts and tables like the ones we're about to look at. And what these do is they compare different LLMs, and they go through a variety of different benchmark metrics and give them an accuracy score. And really, these charts can be kind of overwhelming and confusing because they're all acronyms or partial words. And so we see similar thing here with OpenAI. They just do it in a chart format. Anthropic does the same thing. And what I thought would be helpful is just giving an intuitive understanding of what these benchmarks cover. They're the areas that they look to test. And so I'm not expecting anybody to memorize these or anything like that. And it's not a comprehensive list, but just getting that intuitive level understanding. So we have the MMLU benchmark. And this is a really broad benchmark. It's looking for undergraduate level knowledge, covers almost 60 different subjects just across a wide variety of topics, but all at that undergraduate level. Then we have GPQA, which is I believe GP stands for Google Proof and QA stands for question answer. And there's a subset of that called, so I think the actual data set has something along the lines of 448 questions. And then the subset has 198 questions. And it's looking at that graduate level reasoning. And so more difficult questions. And obviously by the name, you can't find them on Google. So the next three benchmarks are math benchmarks. So I think a lot of people have heard that, especially some of the first models were not so great at math, and they're getting better, but still not great. So there are definitely benchmarks to keep an eye on that. We start with the GSM 8K, which just looks at kind of grade school level math, and we get more challenging with math problem solving, competition questions, and then there's even multilingual, where we take a problem set and translate a bunch of these into various different languages and see how LLMs perform. And then just last five here we have human eval, which are code evaluation. questions and code completion and generation questions. So it's comparable to software engineering questions. And then we have drop, which uses an F1 score for reading comprehension over the text. So you can imagine it's really important for the LLM when you pass it text to understand and comprehend what that text says. And then we have big benchmark hard, which exactly like what it sounds, these are really hard questions that kind of push the boundary of what LLMs can do. The ARC challenge is just this general Q&A knowledge of benchmark. It has about 8,000 questions in it. And then lastly, we have Hella Swag, which is common sense reasoning for the LLM. So in the white paper, it talks about if we prompt the LLM with something like a woman sits at the piano, then we'd expect the LLM to respond back with something along the lines of she sets her fingers on the keys. So I know that was a whirlwind. Not expecting anybody to memorize all of that, but hopefully helpful to give that intuitive understanding of what all those benchmarks mean. What I want to do next, if we can share my screen here, I've created a Domo app, and I want to point out a couple things. First, the definitions down here for those of you who didn't catch just what I said, right here. And then along the bottom here, as we go through these, I have models listed, and we're going to just go through and look at a few of the different benchmarks. So the MMLU is, again, that's undergraduate level knowledge. We can see that GPT-4o does a pretty good job. That's Google's latest and greatest, not Google, OpenAI. And then Claude 3 from Anthropic is a close, second. And what I want to point out here is not just, so much of who's outperforming who, but more, how you could go about building something to do this type of evaluation yourself. And so you can see if we switch the benchmark that the leaders switch. Opus takes the lead over GPT-4o, and probably even more useful is when we compare across a provider. And you can find some interesting things. For example, in the human eval benchmark, which is code generation, we see that Haiku actually outperforms Sonnet, which so Opus for Anthropic, that's their largest model. Then Sonnet is the mid-size, and then Haiku. So their smaller model actually outperformed on this benchmark, which is pretty interesting. Now, all this is great, but it doesn't. So one thing I'll point out is these are publicly available data sets. So nothing stops these LLM providers from going and training an LLM on these benchmarks. So there's an argument to be said for the model to become overfit on these questions. And so what that means is it'll be really good at answering the questions specifically in the benchmark, but not so good at answering related questions. And so just something to consider. And that's why creating your own benchmarks is an important thing. And just to prove that we're not, hypocrites, I took a snapshot of what we do here at Domo. We have benchmarks for our different AI services as well as our assistant. And every time we make a change to the code, these benchmark tests run with data sets that we've created, and we do some NLP tasks to gauge how these different models are measuring up against what we're trying, or what the task that we're trying to accomplish. So just wanted to point that out. So I'm going to jump back here over to our app. And so that covers mostly what I wanted to show you for evaluating quality. I want to go on to other considerations, because at this point, some people might be thinking, well, I'll just pick the best model for everything. And I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why that might not be the best idea. First of which is price. These models range drastically in the price per token, and they're measured with input tokens and output tokens. So, and by tokens, for text generation, we can roughly translate this to words. I believe there's 4 characters to a token. But the idea is that, if you're trying to throw Claude Opus at everything, you're going to pay somewhere in the ballpark of $75 per million output tokens versus, Haiku, same provider, $1.25 per million output tokens. And there are a lot of questions that you can ask where you're going to get a very similar answer between Haiku and Opus. It just depends on the question you're asking, what you're trying to accomplish. So definitely something to take into account. Now, another consideration, if you're still kind of thinking you're going to throw the biggest model at everything, I would point you to throughput. And this can show, if we just look at the Anthropic models, we kind of see this, and it's not true for every case, but for a lot of models, the larger models are also slower models. You can see Opus has a throughput of 24 tokens per second, whereas the smaller model, Haiku, is 111 tokens per second. So, if you're creating something like, a chatbot, and you're just using Opus for everything, you're going to have a latency problem. So definitely a consideration, something to take into account. So I wanted to just show you, in case you don't trust my benchmarks, just a side-by-side comparison and this is just in Playground. I'm picking, on the left, we have Sonnet, and on the right, we have Haiku, which again is the smaller model. Oh, let's see, I paused that on accident. But so I pick Haiku, and I'm going to ask in both prompt windows, just tell me a story, and we'll just see here in real time, or I guess in this video, which model is faster. And we'll see that Haiku returns pretty quickly, whereas we're still waiting and waiting and waiting for Sonnet. And so, definitely some latency considerations to consider there. So all good stuff. So let's see. So yeah, I think we have time to just quickly look at this. This is something I put together where we have price per token on the y-axis, accuracy on the x-axis, and the size of the bubble is throughput, the speed. And so we can see, and then we can jump around for the accuracy to different benchmarks. So for code evaluation, we can get a sense of, okay, if I want the most accurate model, looks like we might be able to throw GPT-4o at it, but it is slower. And if we just are able to accept a slight decrease in accuracy, and then Haiku might be our model, and it's a lot faster. So it really just depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but all things worth taking into account. So the one other consideration I have on this app is context window length. And I think that you can pretty much equate this with how much data can I throw at the LLM before it's going to get mad at me and throw an error. And so especially if you're doing something that requires large context windows like text summarization, say we're trying to summarize an entire book, you wouldn't pick a model like GPT-4 because its context window is only 8,000 tokens. It's just not going to fit the amount of data that you need to pass the LLM without breaking it up. Whereas if you use 4 Turbo, it has a much larger context window. So definitely, if you have a lot of data that you're trying to pass to the LLM, this should be a consideration. So I want to jump back. I'm going to jump back over to the slides here. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. We talked about all these things. And I want to jump to my last point, probably the most important point, which is security. So depending on which LLM that you pick, it's going to impact where your data is actually going. So if you choose OpenAI, for example, as your provider, your LLM provider in Domo, that's fine, but you need to be aware that we have to hit OpenAI servers to go to that LLM. One of the probably the coolest things about Domo.ai is the Domo GPT models, which we can host in our Domo private cloud, which is incredible for a data governance story, because it means that we never have to leave your Domo private cloud. Everything just stays within where Domo is, and you're able to use the LLM and not send that data outside of that Domo private cloud. So it's very cool thing, in my opinion. Really great for that data governance story. And Joe Clark, he knows a lot about this stuff. He's a really smart guy. And I know he's going to talk to you guys a lot about how to go and use all this in Domo. So I think I'll probably go ahead and pass it over to Joe at this point.
It's a great segue. Sorry, I was a little late to the game. Switching everything over. I was reading some of our comments that I did want to pop in and just mention. I love Whitney here. The title says part 3. That's implying that a part 1 and 2 does exist. They do. They can be viewed on all of the social media channels. So we go live for these AI Insight series on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. You can find them everywhere, but I did put the link on YouTube. I'll post it to the other platforms as well. We did have a LinkedIn user. It's weird that they come across like this. Sometimes I usually show who you are, but joined late is recording anywhere. It will be immediately available at the same place that you're watching it now. So it's the beauty about these live streams, Jeremy. I wanted to get to those before we got too deep into the woods here.
Sure.
Joined by some other folks in the chat. Joe, let's bring him back. Fancy background Joe. That's what we should call him, right? Beautiful mountains all day while Jeremy feels like he's being held hostage in his own basement.
That's right.
That's right. That's where we were. All right. Up to speed then. Jeremy, thank you again. Joe, we bring you back in. It's kind of wrap
Thank
things
you.
up here. Thank you again for doing this and for allowing your team some extra minutes to be with us in the community today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I did want to cover how you can find these models in Domo and how you can use them. Starting a bit on the boring topic with administration, but arguably the most important is making sure that you actually have access to it to begin with. At Domo, we are taking a bit of an opt-in approach with AI. So only the admin default role has the required grants in order to use these models and manage these models inside of Domo. The 4 grants that you want to look at are probably most importantly use AI services, and this is kind of the lowest level grant that you'll probably want to give out pretty broadly. This is a just lets users use the AI models, not just LLMs, but also our universal models like our forecasting model. And so definitely, even if you're hopefully we can resolve any concerns about the data. We talked about Domo GPT, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. But really consider if you're an administrator, hey, let's get this use AI services grant out to our teams, our employees. If you're not an administrator in your instance, consider requesting access to it so that you can start playing around with LLMs inside of Domo. Up from that, we have create AI service models, and definitely your data science team is going to want this. But with these large language models, you don't need to be a data scientist to start building AI applications. So if you want to build a model inside of Domo and use it, you'll need that. But also if you want to be able to connect to a model that's hosted by OpenAI or by Amazon Bedrock or Hugging Face or Databricks or any of our other connectors, this is the grant that you'll need. Above that, we have Use AI Chat. So those higher level AI applications that we're working on with AI Chat and page generation are going to require this grant. Again, we want to make sure that our customers are comfortable with those features before enabling it for their employees or for their users. And so that is a separate grant. And then lastly, manage AI services. This is an admin level grant if you want to be able to control what models are available and see what models the other users are building. So I mentioned the settings. We've talked a little bit about Domo GPT, so I'll start with that. We talked about it at Domopalooza as well. It is in beta right now, but I believe we, within the next week or two, are planning on turning Domo GPT on in all supported environments. There are a few regions where we don't have the right hosting infrastructure to be able to provide it. So if you are based in if your Domo instance is based out of our Canada data center or Tokyo data center, those are not available. And also if you're in the Azure environment, we are working on having those environments supported soon, but we don't have a specific schedule for you right now. Outside of Domo GPT, we also have our OpenAI integration. By default, this is actually off now. So if you don't have Domo GPT and enabled in your instance yet, you'll need to come in here in the admin section settings for the AI service layer and make sure the OpenAI is enabled. Again, as Jeremy mentioned, that does mean that when you use AI functionality in Domo, depending on the feature, that may go out to OpenAI servers. And there are different models available. So even if you have Domo GPT, but you want to use GPT-4, you can have that enabled as well. Moving on to talk a little bit more about Domo GPT. So on the left here, I have our AI services with text generation, text summarization, and then kind of mapped to the models that we have available in each of those services. Jeremy showed this in that video. We have Domo GPT Chat Medium and Small. These models are based, as he implied, are based on Anthropic models. They're hosted in Amazon Bedrock, so they stay within our Domo hosting environment. We also have Domo GPT Summarize and a SQL model that drives our text-to-SQL and text-to-beast mode functionality. Outside of the Domo provided models, we also have these, ML connectors or adapters listed here. We are always wanting more, so if you have a request, please send it our way. But this will allow you to bring in your AWS credentials or your OpenAI credentials, or if your data science team has a model out in Databricks, or if you're wanting to use an open source model in Hugging Face, we've got you covered. You can bring those in, and there's a few different ways that you can use those models. First of all is just, once you import a model into model management, you can execute it directly in the UI. You can test your model there, and we'll execute it and we'll show the output that you get. We can also, look at the schema and configure the schema to make sure that you can use it correctly in various places in Domo. We also have the AI service layer, which includes the AI playground for those specific tasks that I mentioned before. Here I'm using a text generation model where you can test different models for different tasks. You can also play around if you are familiar with prompt templating or prompt engineering. You can do some of that here. This isn't, both of these things aren't really end user applications. They're more, hey, if you're building an AI application in Domo, then these are places for you to come and test and experiment on your models. And both of these will have this code snippet box here so that you can execute your model from Jupyter, from apps. We'll get to that as well. So custom apps or Domo bricks. And these are actually screenshots of those code snippets. We have some example Domo bricks in the App Store if you want to search for, data set description brick. I think, or even just search for AI. I think there's a few different AI related bricks. Some of those do have the code available, so you can open it up and edit it and view how they're using code like this to call our services or call the model that's running in the AI service layer or in model management. Workflows. This is, I think, an underutilized integration that we have. This particular workflow is generating a report. It's really good for automating with AI. Also really good if you want a human in the loop, where we can have the model generate a report. We can send that generated report to an actual person that looks at it and says, "Oh yeah, this is good," or requests some changes, and then can email that report. We have a workflow just like this that one of our teams uses internally and uses our text generation endpoint to generate a weekly report. But there are a lot of different use cases. We've got our summarization service available here as well, and that's another one that we have another internal team that also uses to summarize content. Inside of our Jupyter integration, we also have our Domo Jupyter SDK with support. It's integrated with the AI service layer. This is great for more complex use cases. In this example, I just grabbed a Wikipedia article, in this case, Washington, D.C., and just hit our summarization endpoint. It took it down from over 26,000 words down to one that looks like 1 to 200 words. It's a short summary, and so using Jupyter would be very easy to take a bunch of articles like this, summarize it, or using text generation, maybe extract other insights from it. And then, of course, you can write all of those insights and summaries or whatever the output is of your process back out into a data set in Domo. Data flows is another place that we're working towards. This is actually fairly new and fairly limited. This showed up just a week or two ago at the Databricks Data and AI Summit, where we're calling a model. I think this particular data flow wasn't no LLM, but we are calling a model that's hosted in Databricks. And one of the limitations with data flows is that the inputs have to be CSV, and most models take JSON. Most LLMs, I should say, take JSON. So we are working on improvements to this so that it's easier to use LLMs inside of data flows. I'm really excited about that. That'll be a game changer for sure. And like I said today, or we can still use it in Jupyter data flows where you're calling the AI service layer, and you can schedule a notebook to be executed on a schedule as a data flow. So that is an option short term. Although as Jeremy showed, some of these models are very expensive and can even be slow. If you throw a billion rows at GPT-4 or Cloud 3 Opus, you're going to have a bad time. So being cognizant of that. I think there's some really cool use cases that we'll be able to support here in the future. I think that's most of what I had. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the things we're working on to improve AI capabilities in Domo and the ability to use large language models. One of the things I touched on before is AI readiness for a Domo data set. That will allow you to give some of that context, additional business and organization-specific context to the model, make that available so that it can understand your users' questions better. Just like that AI chat experience that we are showing, we want that to be a customizable experience that you can embed in your websites or write on a dashboard, and give you the ability to select which model we're using or which tools and actions it can perform or which data sets it has access to. So that's something we're really excited about. That hits the next 2 points. I think Brian mentioned retrieval augmented generation, where we retrieve, just because the model's trained on a broad set of data. If we want to reduce hallucinations, one of the ways that we do that is by giving it context that's specific to the question. Vector databases have become, very instrumental in that approach. And so we are working on some APIs that we are using internally today, but we want to make those available externally as well for customers that want to build AI applications on top of Domo. AI service layer, we are also working on expanding support for custom models that can be called through there. So some of those connectors that I showed earlier, you can use some of those models on the AI service layer for text generation or text to SQL, but not all, especially the ones like Databricks or Hugging Face, where they don't have a well-defined API for each of their models. And so we are working on additional support there, as well as additional support for calling models and leveraging those large language model tasks directly in data flows to leverage AI in your data pipelines. That's it for the roadmap. Lastly, before we jump to answering a couple of questions, please, if this stuff looks interesting to you, reach out to your CSM if you want access to our AI chat or page generation beta, or Domo GPT if it's not enabled in your instance yet. Also, go make sure you have the grants required and play around in AI Playground. If you haven't spent a lot of time, or even if you have spent a lot of time, working with LLMs, play around with those features that we built into Domo itself to help you build, those custom apps and AI experiences right inside of Domo. I think that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Let's bring some folks back here. Jeremy, Brian. Flo's like, please don't put me back on camera today. Watch. See, she does that face. There she is. Look, here she is. Hi, Flo. Obviously, this is the call out for Q&A. We'll do a little banter here, hoping to stir some inspiration or questions from our audience. We are very close to the hour, so if you do have a question, a burning thought, or discussion point, please throw those in the comments or chat section wherever you're watching, whether it be on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter. A lot of the questions were taken care of through the chat. Obviously, all of these sessions are immediately posted to the exact same place where you found them. So if you were watching on LinkedIn and you're like, hey, I was halfway in, when we end the stream, you should be able to watch the recording immediately at the same page, which is really cool. Same place on YouTube and Twitter. Flo, any parting thoughts? Not getting a lot of comments coming through. Brian, Jeremy, Joe, what do we want to do for the last 2 minutes here? Flo could sing a song.
I got kicked out of choir when I was a child, so that's probably not in people's best interest.
I feel like that's always the go-to.
I guess sing some One Direction.
Oh,
that's my teenage years.
there you go.
People come join the next webinar on AI, please.
Yes, please. Again, same place you're finding these, you'll find the upcoming sessions. We are doing most of these across all of our social channels. And I say it's a multi-part series because we continue to add to these sessions. We've got a question. Look at that. We bantered long enough. I'm going to attempt Lacine, maybe. Apologies for not pronouncing the name right. Bad old educator habit of doing that. This may have been said, but can the AI chat page generation access be limited by user or role? For example, we may want to test it, but not necessarily give it to the entire development team to access at the present moment.
Yeah, I can take that one. If you take a look at the AI related, right, AI service layer grants in the admin section, there is a use AI chat grant. It may be hidden behind the feature switch. So if you don't have access to AI chat yet, then you may not see it. However, as I mentioned earlier, it is only given by default to admin users, or the default admin role. So as long as your the other developers in your instance have their own custom role or have a non-admin default role, you'll be able to sign out the exact role that you want to have access to that feature once it's enabled.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for being a part of these. I know there's a lot that we're doing when it comes to AI and LLMs and all of this new technology that we're bringing into Domo and utilizing the tool to its fullest. And we can't thank you guys enough for giving your time, because we have a community of users, tons of people watching today, hundreds of people watching today, which is pretty incredible. And it kind of shows the excitement and enthusiasm we have, not only for Domo as the tool, but where AI is going to take it, in the next few years. So Jeremy, Joe, Brian, Flo, thanks again for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Again, be sure to check out these AI Insight series happening all across social media on a bi-weekly basis. I say that knowing that holidays are coming up. So we'll be announcing the next one very shortly. I think we have 5 currently on the calendar. There may be a 6th and a 7th. But again, appreciate everybody being here. Thanks again.